just a little past 4 o'clock on the Pacific Coast. I am Jonathan Neal. I am the director of the Center for Business and Management of the Arts at Claremont Graduate University. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the second in our series of arts and culture conversations that we are hosting this fall. You can find out more about those and register for the conversations at cgu.edu/events, and more about the Center for Business and Management of the Arts and our Art Business and Arts Management programs at cgu.edu/CBMArts. I will be putting both of those in the links in the chat box too. Before we begin, as usual, I'd like to request that everyone please keep your microphones and your video off during the conversation if you are not taking part in the conversation. So that means that our panelists will be at the top of your screens and you can only hear and see them regardless of which Zoom view you have selected. And also, if you have questions for our speakers, which I encourage you to have, please put those into the chat box and I will be fielding those to Ki-Bum Kim, who is the organizer and the moderator for this afternoon's conversation. For many of you, Ki-Bum needs no introduction, but for those of you who do, he is the head of our art business program at the Center for Business and Management of the Arts at CGU. He's a specialist in art law and the dynamics of the art markets. He's also a partner, I think importantly, at Commonwealth and Council, a contemporary art gallery located here in Koreatown in Los Angeles, which was recently written up by Art News as one of the country's most closely watched art spaces for its artist-first and collaborative approach to the business. I'm very happy that Ki-Bum has brought these two guests to our Zoom screens. And without further ado, welcome, and I hand it over to you, Ki-Bum.
All right. Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you everyone for joining us and our guests, Oliver and Jeffrey, two of the people that I perhaps probably admire most in the art world, and I'm very excited about the conversation today. So to give brief introductions of the folks who will be on the panel discussion. Oliver Newton is a co-founder and partner of the gallery 47 Canal in Chinatown, New York City. And the gallery has, I actually need to fact check this, Oliver, because I get confused. It was 179. Is it 2009 or 2011?
The project space at Margaret ran was 2009, but the gallery 47 Canal was 2011, March 2011.
Yeah, so it was one of the kind of most wonderful kismet things for us at Commonwealth and Council to be able to meet these guys. We have similar histories and kind of trajectories that really mirror one another, except they turned into a commercial gallery a few years before we did. But they really stand for a particular vision and a real community of artists with artists who have really defined kind of art making and our relationship with bodies and capitalism in the digital age. Oliver, prior to starting 47 Canal with Margaret Lee, who's also an artist, worked at the gallery Alexander and Bonin. Yeah, he also serves on the selection committee for Art Basel Miami Beach, which I just joined this year. And as one of the first galleries to open at the Lower East Side, I think it can speak a lot to that kind of the dynamics in New York and the shifts. I mean, someone who I think I could spend the entire next hour talking about the wealth of experience that Jeffrey brings to the table. Jeffrey, I think you're the only person that I know who's basically held every type of job you can have in the art world. Jeffrey has worked by turns as an artist, a writer, a curator, a dealer. He actually ran MoCA here in Los Angeles as director. Is currently running the Deitch Gallery both in New York City and Los Angeles as of a couple of years ago. For those of you who are familiar, I think Jeffrey in many ways has been well, has always been on top of the zeitgeist, but also very prescient, very much like foretelling where the industry is going. He in many ways was at the incipient stages of kind of a role, a job that didn't really exist before the art advisor. And he has also, through Deitch projects and his various curatorial projects, has really opened up the art world to have a dialogue with a larger mass audience, and really blurring the boundaries between art and other different kinds of creative industries like fashion. So a real pleasure to have both of you here. And with these conversations, we like to keep things a bit informal. And I think, you know, being that in the times that we're in today, what we really want to focus on is the gallery business and in these kinds of changing dynamics in 2020. So to begin with, maybe I'll start with you, Jeffrey. So if you could speak a bit about, you know, so you've seen the various different kinds of vicissitudes in the art world and art market over the decades. How does this compare to the different kinds of downturns you've seen, maybe within like the late 80s, the 2008 crisis, and what are kinds of lessons and takeaways that you think we can apply here, or like what feels different to you now?
First, thank you for that kind introduction. I entered the art world in the mid-1970s in what I didn't even realize was a deep art depression. It was the time of the oil crisis, and things were quite bleak in the art economy, but I didn't realize that because it was a small community. We didn't have that many active collectors. The gallery was really for the art community of artists, writers, curators, and the collectors weren't that different from everyone else. Maybe had a little more money, but they weren't, it wasn't about the 1%. And then I saw things start getting more active through the late 70s, 80s. There was a crash of the stock market in 1987 that affected the auction market, but really not so much the younger galleries. But there was a very deep recession starting in 1990. And just a second, Jane, could you tell him to block the phone because I'm on a webinar. He doesn't know that. Sorry. And that changed the art market completely. And so a number of the major galleries that thrived in the late 1980s were just gone. There was a whole wave of galleries in Los Angeles that just had to close. The main event that precipitated this was the sudden withdrawal of the Japanese from the art market. And that had an effect even on the younger galleries. And there was also a tremendous lack of liquidity in real estate. And it took a long time to recover. It was 7 years. 1997, things began to revive. There were some severe effects in the art market after the 9/11 attacks, and it wasn't even appropriate to offer an artwork to a collector right after that. And the 2008 financial crisis affected things, but it wasn't like 1990. It's been a pretty steady growth in the art market since the beginning of the 1980s to now. And the change in the prices is just astonishing. A a great abstract expressionist work that might have sold for $100,000 in 1980 today would be $20 million plus or more. And so it's been astonishing to see all this. We don't even need to mention prices of Jean-Michel Basquiat and other artists who started at $50. So I would have expected, many of us expected with this pandemic, that it would have very severe effects on the art business. But to my surprise, and happy about it, is after a month or so with very little activity, and it was thought to be insulting to call up a collector and say, would you be interested in buying this? Collectors started calling us, and collectors began talking to each other. And so a lot of art collectors, people with a lot of resources, people with more moderate resources, they have a lot more time on their hands. And people who are interested in art are following galleries online, telephoning each other. And as a number of the galleries that respond is, you know, how's business? Well, it's okay. Okay, so it's not a boom, but we're able to keep things going. And the interest is as strong as ever. We've got a lot of challenges in our world right now. People are looking to art as a sense of connection, to express some belief in an optimistic future, all the challenges. I'm curious what Oliver is finding. Probably something similar.
Yeah, Oliver, can you speak to that from 47 Canal's perspective and what you see from your colleagues in that kind of emerging gallery milieu in the Lower East Side in New York? And I mean, something that I always found interesting is with the history of 47 Canal and how it developed, especially as a project space that Margaret started in 179, is that, you know, in many ways, it was an opportunity that was made possible through the 2008 financial crisis, in that I believe that she got the space available to utilize for free for a few months, right? That was kind of the genesis of this thing.
Yeah, I think that, first of all, thank you for the nice introduction earlier, and hi to Jeffrey. It's really nice to see you. Yeah, Margaret, in 2009, you know, right after the, you know, kind of the financial crisis that was happening in late 2008, it was a really exciting time to be in New York. There was so much happening, and in a way that isn't possible now because of the conditions of COVID. But in 2009, it was everybody that I knew seemed to be starting a gallery in their apartment, roving galleries, galleries in parking garages, under the BQE, you know, all things that I think you had seen kind of in the past, but we hadn't been present really in a prominent way in New York in what felt like quite some time, as long as I had kind of been involved in the art world, which I really didn't get involved too much until 2006. So it amazingly, it felt very free in that moment. And the people that I was around and the people that were doing this, none of us really, you know, we were all very young. None of us really had any money that we had to lose. So we kind of joked at the time, well, we're just as broke as we were before, because, you know, there was nothing to be lost. And so Margaret was able to, because there had actually been a fire in the 179 Canal building. And so she was able to, because the whole building had been vacated because of this fire, she was able to secure this space for free. And she started off by throwing parties in that space. And I feel like that's often how artist run spaces or galleries get started, by throwing parties. And then moved on to having a show curated by Josh Klein, who brought in actually for a 3-day show, because that was kind of how things were done. There were one night, maybe one weekend. That was when I'm actually not sure if I met Margaret at that time, but I'd known Josh Klein for some years. So I came to that opening, and through that kind of a community coalesced. And there was a lot of young curators in that community, young writers, young artists. And Margaret ran that space fully for a year. I don't even think she had free rent for the full year. I think she had to kind of fundraise and registered as a nonprofit about 6 months in. And then there was about a one year gap, maybe 9-month gap between when that space ceased to exist and when we opened as a commercial gallery. So yeah, I mean, there is in these moments of down, financial downturns. In the past, it felt like a great opportunity. It felt like a crack was open in the system that you could occupy. But obviously, like because of the situation of COVID, this idea of all, tons of people cramming into a tiny little apartment to see an art show isn't really possible.
And do you agree with Jeffrey that 2020, even though it's definitely precarious times and most of us are kind of stuck in our homes, it has not been perhaps like as hard for other industries like restaurants?
Yeah, for sure. Like it hasn't been nearly as hard as it has been for restaurants and other types of business. I mean, we're incredibly fortunate that, we are able to do our, we can't obviously, we can do our exhibitions in some capacity remotely. We can adjust the model very quickly of how we work. And in this case, maybe get dragged into the future or dragged into the present, as it were, in doing things in a way that a lot of other industries had already kind of moved towards and adopted. So yeah, I mean, it's the fun of running a gallery to me has always been the ability to move quickly and to change and adapt to changing conditions quickly. So like Jeffrey said, business is okay. Business is, I would say, significantly down over the previous year, but in an instance like our gallery, and I would say an instance like many small galleries, expenses are way down. Having an entire year of art fairs wiped from our schedule is a massive relief in terms of expenditure. So it all kind of, for us, I think for smaller galleries and younger galleries, the expenditure of an art fair is disproportional to the revenue over the same time. So I think that financial burden weighs heavier on the smaller galleries. So it allows a little bit of breathing room.
Yeah, I think we can definitely speak to that from the perspective of our gallery at Commonwealth and Council. I feel like it was really in June when things started to shift. I think the financial markets had kind of picked back up and stabilized. And as Jeffrey said, it was really like the collectors in many ways reaching out to us and asking for works, because we felt it would be uncouth to like just send previews and things like that prior to that, even though we were in regular contact with kind of our closest clients. As Oliver said, in many ways, when a space is starting out, the best way to amass an audience and get attention and build a clientele, perhaps, is to throw parties or events. The art world is obviously a very social industry. Jeffrey can attest to the how useful good events and parties can be as well. But I guess like that is one key area in which 2020 does feel very different, in that we're not able to really see each other, especially in group settings, in person. So maybe Jeffrey, like it might be a good time to speak about the initiative that you led on, which is Gallery Platform Los Angeles, a consortium of galleries that came together to have a web platform, and then like we can speak a bit more about just like Oliver and I was saying earlier, Oliver and I this is our third Zoom together today. This week is the Art Basel online viewing rooms. So we're just on Zoom after Zoom after Zoom doing walkthroughs. We can talk about the efficacy of the online experience and what kinds of improvements we're seeing or perhaps hope to see. But Jeffrey, can you speak about sort of the genesis story of Gallery Platform Los Angeles?
Sure. Well, it has been a very rewarding experience. So it started with just some casual conversations with galleries that I follow in Los Angeles, some of the more experimental galleries, and people were very worried, how they're going to get through this. And I just said, well, why not start an online platform for all the serious galleries in Los Angeles? And so I composed a short letter and I sent it out to 65 Los Angeles galleries, covering the ones I visited. I missed a number. We're now up to 90 galleries on our platform in LA. And the response was overwhelming. Every single gallery except one said, I'm with you, I'm on, I'm joining. And then the one gallery that was skeptical when they saw that everyone else had joined, they begged, can we come in too? And the interesting thing is that, as we all know, there's such a dynamic art community in Los Angeles, all of these galleries, but there was no gallery association. Mm-hmm. And people told me, some of the old timers, that there actually was one years and years ago, but it faded out. But for a long time, there's been no association of art galleries. So the platform is the immediate project, but the most important result is starting an association for the whole art community. And people enjoy the platform. There have been some good sales, particularly it's been important for some of the more experimental galleries. And so the sales have not been great. And many of the sales are to people who already are known to the galleries, but still it's been quite helpful. But for me, the most interesting part is the editorial section with visits to artists, visits to gallerists, and the discourse that's taken place between the gallerists. And we have these Zoom meetings with our operating committee with 15 people, which we'll get more people on, we'll rotate. We have an editorial committee. And so I've built all these new relationships and friendships and the dialogue with people who I've known for 30 years in the field, but who I just exchange pleasantries with from time to time. Now we have substantive conversations. So it's been terrific to build this community, and it's going to be a platform that goes on in different ways. And hopefully in the coming year, we won't need really online sales, but there'll be other joint projects that will be beneficial to the gallerists and to our constituents, artists, curators, collectors.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's been one of the things that's been, from our perspective, being a member and a participating gallery and gallery platform is really exciting, is thinking about this sort of like more of an organized structure. So something that we noticed was this was months ago and things might have changed, but when Governor Newsom first put together a task force from a lot of industry leaders to try to think through and plan for the reopening of businesses and also to help all of these different kinds of industries that are suffering through the COVID shutdown. There was no one obviously a lot of people from Hollywood, but there was no one represented from either visual or performing arts out of like 100 people. My hope is that these kinds of organizations like Gallery Platform Los Angeles can have that kind of lobbying impact. So, maybe we can shake out some money support from them too, or, some more responsive relationship when it comes to just general support and permitting for events and things like that. Oliver, can you, and I think something that really speaks to its success is there are other cities that have been trying to adopt and start initiatives like this, like in London. They just announced one in the Bay Area. I don't know if you guys saw, called 8 Bridges. So all of the galleries that are in the Bay Area seem to be banding together. But Oliver, can you speak to the sort of the New York dynamic? I guess, in many ways, I feel like even though New York and Los Angeles get kind of compared and grouped together a lot as like the art capitals in the States, the dynamics are quite different. The scale is very different. And I mean, just by geography, a lot of galleries are clustered more together, and you have sort of existing organizations like ADAA and NADA, which are technically not region specific, but very much focused in the New York scene. Can you speak a little bit to the these sorts of collective initiatives you've seen?
I mean, probably not very well. I'm, Margaret and I think are maybe a bit of an anomaly. I think, we've never been a member of NADA, though I'm a big believer in NADA and a big supporter and advocate for NADA as an organization, and we've never been a member of the ADAA. I was involved in, kind of post kind of shutdown in New York, let's say kind of mid-late March in several kind of ad hoc groups of people beginning some discussions. But it never really felt like there was any attempt to kind of coalesce some sort of organizational structure or some sort of camaraderie. I mean, there was a lot of very good back and forth and helpfulness on a kind of small level, but nothing kind of as ambitious as Gallery Platform LA. And yeah, I don't know if that's just like a New York thing that New York. I mean, Jeffrey probably can speak to this best because he's been in both places. But New York to me has always felt like it's. I don't want to say it. At least on the Lower East Side, or let's say with smaller galleries, I wouldn't say it's competitive, right? Like I don't think of other galleries as my competitors, but I would say that it's not. It's not something. There isn't just this kind of we're all kind of always organizing, or if people are, maybe I'm not always involved in that. I mean, there's been a few people organizing gallery walks and Tribeca gallery walks and Lower East Side gallery walks. I didn't participate in any of those, mostly because I just wasn't sure from a personal health and safety level if that felt appropriate for our gallery. And after discussions with my staff, who would be a part of that, we decided to not participate in those things. So yeah, the New York, I don't know, it's always felt like a bit more of a loner city, and maybe it's because we're all on top of each all the time. So we always see each other. I can't walk through the Lower East Side without running into 2 or 3 dealers. And maybe it's because LA, you feel more isolated, that you're more inclined to band together. Jeffrey, would you say that's true? I mean, you operate in both spaces.
I think New York is more anarchic in how it comes together socially. So these things are very organic. And back in the 70s when I started, you didn't even need a gallery association because we were all on the same block or a block away. Almost all the galleries were in a few buildings in Soho on West Broadway and Worcester Street. So no need for any organization. Yeah. We just saw each other on the street and shared a lot of interests. As things got bigger, I saw the New York art world change from a community to an art market to now an art industry. So it's just too massive. And also it's too divergent. You have the giant auction houses and the mega galleries and exclusive Upper East Side galleries showing expensive modern art. And you have scrappy galleries in Brooklyn. And somehow in LA, we have Gagosian and Hauser and Wirth and other well-established galleries. mixing with the Pit and Bel Ami, but somehow it's more coherent. And in Los Angeles, there's also, I think, more of a spirit that we're onto something here, that this is where a lot is happening and people are excited. New York keeps on generating tremendous interest and innovation in art, but there is a sense that things are a little jaded, and it falls into a kind of pattern. But we're about inventing things more in Los Angeles, and the collectors are very supportive of this. So I think the fact that we were able to assemble this platform with all the galleries in a matter of 2 weeks shows something about the spirit of the Los Angeles art community, the gallery community.
Yeah, no, as a New York transplant myself, I think I could definitely attest to that. And yeah, I mean, the sort of like the more, I do feel that there's more of an open-minded and enterprising kind of spirit that runs through Los Angeles through its history, but in this sort of like smaller art scene in today's moment too. I'll say when I first moved here, I loved it, but it was also a bit frustrating because like I was so used to the New York speed, and I was just like, why are people not answering my emails in a day? And like, why are the baristas so slow? You do have to sort of get into the rhythm of.
Yes. So, the negative running a gallery in Los Angeles is, say you meet somebody at an event and you have good rapport. And they say, oh, well, wonderful. I can't wait to visit you at your gallery. And they break one appointment, another appointment, and people have such a nice situation at their house in Malibu or Bel Air that they just don't want to get in the car and drive to your gallery. So it's very different than New York, where people can just walk a few blocks or take a cab. So it's a little more work, but you can build some deep relationships. And because once people get to your gallery, they're not in and out in 5 minutes like they are in New York. It may have taken them an hour to drive there. So they want to come and have a conversation, and a deeper relationship results.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I think that was one of the biggest surprises when I first moved to LA is, when you used to hit, like when you went to openings in New York, that meant like you go to one neighborhood and hit 20 openings and you're just like in and out saying hi to people, having a few minute conversation. In Los Angeles, like people stuck around and like for like an hour or 2 hours, and I was so confused. But it does lend for this kind of a slow food, slow burn, deeper relationship to develop. I do want to dig a bit deeper on the whole, like, what we've been forced to do, the development of like the online sales platforms, and the sort of basically all art fairs have been canceled this year after the New York Armory Week. But I would also love to hear a bit more of a historical perspective, Jeffrey. So something that you mentioned earlier, when you said that you've seen throughout your career, you've kind of seen the art market, particularly I think the contemporary art market, just grow and grow and grow. But what do you think has been like the main driver or a few main drivers for that kind of shift, where the art world grew from this sort of like a small esoteric community where you could have collectors who are wealthy, but could be more like considered upper middle class, and we still there's still kind of like mythological sheen on like the Vogels, who had very regular jobs and were able to amass an incredible collection. But that might be basically impossible to do in today's art market. What do you think has been like the main catalyst for like the art market that we see today?
Well, that's a great question. Well, first, going back to 1974 in the Vogels. So one of my jobs at the John Weber Gallery in Soho was to greet Dorothy and Herbert Vogel every Saturday. They came in with a check for $50. They bought Saul LeWitt, Carl Andre, Robert Mangold, Bob Ryman, artists we were showing, they bought on account. And they were very important clients of the gallery. Other clients were, there was a psychiatrist from Philadelphia who drove up every other Saturday. These were the kinds of people. And then once a year, Count Ponza would come from Milan. And if we played it right, he would spend $100,000. He would spend a week and visit all the artists. Without Ponza, the gallery would have collapsed. And a few other wild cards. I remember when Baron Lambert came from Brussels and was interested in all kinds of things. And I added up the tally. It was $150,000. Incredible. And so show the price to the Baron. And he says, okay, well, I'll offer you $75,000 for the group. And I was so shocked, embarrassed. And so I went into the owner, John Weber. I said, well, this is the offer. What should we do? How do I respond? And John said, take it. But that's how desperate things were. And yeah, but it taught me a few lessons. One of them was, if you were polite as a collector, you can always ask for a discount. And he asked it for the discount in the most elegant way. So what happened to, for the art world to grow from maybe 20 collectors worldwide for difficult conceptual art to this massive situation now where 100,000 people go to Art Basel fairs, and in Hong Kong, they actually sell out. That by the first public day, it's sold out. No more tickets available. They're at capacity. It's amazing. So where did all this come from? So on one side, it is connection with a financial market that collectors for a long time understood that art could be an important asset, an intergenerational asset, and European noble families and wealthy merchant families bought art as part of their family heritage. And some of these noble families, you read in auction reports, occasionally sell works that the families had for 400 years. And this is, the businesses are gone, ever they don't have their feudal payments anymore from their tenant farmers, but they still have an important old master painting. So there's been a long understanding of art as an asset, but this more contemporary understanding that you could buy a work of Jeff Koons for $4,500 in 1985, and then this piece could sell for $16 million in 2018. Actually, that's the Jeff Koons basketball in the tank. It's an actual example. These gains have been well publicized, and so that's brought in a lot more people, a lot more confidence. So the idea shifted that instead of buying art that's just like for pleasure, it's something that you enjoy, but there's no value there. It's instead an asset. It's an investment. So it's given people motivation to buy. So there's a lot of positive things that's given all of us in the business a much larger customer base. But of course, we all know there are a lot of negatives coming with that too, where many people just see the financial value and treat this whole field that we devote our lives to as a giant casino. And that can be very depressing. But it's also important to understand that what's happened with the art market is not something in isolation. So I'm probably the oldest person on this webinar. Okay, so I grew up in the 1950s in Hartford, Connecticut. There were a few ethnic restaurants, Chinese restaurants. Hartford didn't even have a fancy restaurant. Okay, and so just think of cuisine, and in the supermarket, it was canned peas and TV dinners. Okay, what a contrast between this whole explosive development of the notion of cuisine and restaurants that are sort of owned by people who have the same motivation as art gallery owners. They're trying to do something amazing and aesthetic, and we're all aware of this. So what happened with cuisine, design, fashion, it's an expansion of visual culture in all elements and other aspects of culture that not just America and the other countries, now China, people going from a much more basic kind of life to being involved in a much more aesthetic experience. And many, many people share this. I've also mentioned, I've always had this mission. I'm wondering why, growing up in the 50s and then a teenager in the 60s, why was it that all these people followed progressive music? And that you could fill up an arena or a festival with thousands of people listening to the music, but a museum was virtually empty. Okay, and I thought, why isn't visual art connecting with people in a broad way? Well, now it's really starting. And in particular, there's an explosion due to the images that can be sent over social media, Instagram, all that. It's created this mass fluency in contemporary art and visual culture. So we're seeing that it's a fascinating, complex group of answers to your question, which is an essential question of what happened to change it from this tiny community on West Broadway and Cork Street in London to this worldwide market and worldwide industry.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like a very insightful take. And as someone who was born and grew up in Korea in the 80s, I can attest that and came to America in the 90s. I think both in Korea and when I first moved here, that diversity of cuisine really didn't exist then either. This is all a very recent phenomenon. But yeah, it's like we all got used to it so fast. I mean, something that we took stock of during 2020 is, I think for the past few years, as the gallery's been participating in this sort of like international art circuit, there were times that like my business partner and I would travel twice in 1 week. So we were, I went to LAX more than anywhere else. Yeah, how fast things have changed, the pace has been getting accelerated more and more. And of course, with all of these things, there are positives and negatives come with it. How fast information travels through social media and just we're able to send and connect with people digitally has profoundly changed how just information travels, how we're able to connect with each other and communicate with one another. And all of that translates to the transactional aspects of the industries as well. But I want to open it up to the larger audience for questions, but I do want to ask both of you. So, you know, probably the biggest thing that happened, and Jeffrey, you've been a mastermind with Gallery Platform. You've actually been a sort of a founder of online platform. To be honest, from our perspective, we probably participate in about 4 or 5 sort of like global art fair online editions at this point. We were participating in Gallery Platform Los Angeles. They've been okay, but they really served as conduits to connect with already existing clients. So it's all been existing relationships, something that, you know, was really, we really haven't met anyone new this year. And because our expenses are down, that's fine. But in order for the business to continue to grow, and for our artists just to get that kind of exposure to meet not just collectors, but curators and writers too, it's been very difficult to negotiate that. And I do think that there's just, it's difficult to strike up a conversation through these online sales platforms, because oftentimes people just write up an email being like, is this available? Or can you tell me a little bit about it? And you just like send them a fact sheet. You have like a paragraph that's like pre-canned. You know, there's no real personal touch. It's, I'm realizing that so much of how we relate to one another as people and communicate is through like body language and reading the room and like, yeah, that kind of the social context perhaps. So how do you both think about that, and like what do you think we can improve perhaps through the online platform, which really is here to stay in many ways? Oliver, do you want to go first? You're mute.
I think there's probably lots of ways to improve upon the online platform, but I mean, I think it's, it's thinking about what is it one wants to improve upon, right? Like what is the goal, and where do you want the innovation to exist? I mean, I think that one thing that has been really interesting to me is that one of the most fun I've had in the last 6 months is thinking about what our online projects are going to be, and how do we present them in a way that seems interesting to us and hopefully to an audience. And so, I think kind of post-COVID that, every gallery will be running 2 programs. They will be running their online program, and they will be running their brick and mortar program. Our online program has been, I don't think we've really focused on works that we were interested in. So very often they weren't for sale or had already sold. It was more about communicating and educating about a certain project by a certain artist. So the sales were never, I mean, sales were always nice, and you hope for kind of indirect sales. I think that was maybe more what we were thinking. So maybe it would turn somebody onto an artist and you would sell a different work. But we never thought about it in terms of what was available inventory. I always just kind of sat in my room for a while and thought, what would be cool to show that we maybe no one's seen, or we could see in a different context. I think if online sales are the key, then in a way, it's maybe I'm being optimistic, but I think it's the same to benefit online sales. It's finding a better way to communicate. I mean, I think that sales come from education. And sales come from enticing a collector into the world of an artist. And I think that, learning for a gallerist to communicate that takes a little time, and whatever method they find works for them best to draw people in and introduce them in, the world that the artist creates and what the artist is trying to create. I think it can be done online probably just as well. I mean, obviously seeing an artwork in person is, for the most part, irreplaceable, but, we're in a situation where that maybe that seeing that work doesn't exist for the collector until the work exists in their home. So, you know, I think it's just about adapting. I don't think there's a kind of answer or a silver bullet, so to speak.
Jeffrey?
The way I would answer this question is to emphasize that the essence of this business is relationships. And even the biggest galleries don't have that many serious collector relationships. So if a gallery's lucky, they might have 6 serious collector relationships where there's somebody who is always in touch and buys something out of every other show. And you really devote a lot of effort to educating them, to building something with them. And you can't do this with that many people. So the online gallery is very good to keep a lot of people informed, but real things happen. Sales, patronage of artists, connecting with, you know, to go further, have an exhibition. It's really out of relationships. So I've been lucky to have some relationships that go back 40 years. Some of them for people, for whatever reason, after 10 years of a great relationship, they might get angry with you and that relationship is over. But luckily, new people keep coming in, and it's like friendship. Okay, it's very rare somebody looks at your online gallery and says, "I want to be in with you." It's like how you make friends. You are introduced through another friend, and so most of our important collectors have been introduced by other collectors, and very similar with artists, with curators. So it's a network of relationships that is the essence of our field. So the online structure will be there to enhance our development of these relationships and to inform people. So it will be a supplement to what we ordinarily do, not a substitute. But I think it is permanent. People like it that they can go online and get a whole view of your gallery and decide, well, maybe it's not worth the trip, or wow, this is great, let's get over there. So I think that just as we try to make books with the artists, a very good online presentation is going to be expected. And we're just in the primitive stage now. I think there will be people who really develop the skill so that the online experience can be as close as possible to actually being there.
Yeah, and if I could add my 2 cents, yeah, I agree with both of you. I think so much of it's contingent on relationships and really that educational component. That's really our jobs as dealers, foremost, I think. And it's a bit clunky to do on this online interface, but that's why, as Jeffrey, as you said, I think perhaps the most compelling and important aspect of GPLA has been the editorial part, because it's really, in many ways, I think it's educating the audience about the LA art community. So if you haven't checked it out, they have these regular content that features both gallerists and artists and collectors. So it's really bringing in folks from all different facets of the LA art community. And, you know, including this, what we're on currently, there have been so many Zoom walkthroughs, Zoom studio visits, and IG lives and all of that. And I imagine that we'll see more and more innovative shifts in that. Something that I haven't seen too much of that I hope to see more is artists really taking the online format as kind of like the physical architecture of a space and making work for perhaps, and or kind of curating projects and shows that really perhaps even come alive better online. even though it's probably not going to be the most saleable thing. So I'm curious about and would like to see a bit more of that continue to grow. We do have a question from the audience, from Susan Schwartz. How many of the artists do you work with are demanding resale royalties, or I think it means co-ownership of their works, or I guess some kind of a continuing stake in their works, in light of the prices increases we've seen and the sort of accelerated flipping of works by younger artists. This perhaps is a more pressing demand. Are there artists imposing limits on when their work may be resold? For example, no resale for a year. Would any of you like to take that?
Well, I would say that it's an increasingly it's a conversation that I'm having with artists more often than I had in the past. I mean, it isn't something that I have so much experience with. It's this kind of flipping and trend of flipping is something that hasn't really occurred with any of the artists that we work with. So, but you know, I think that is something that a lot of people are concerned with. So I think that the dialogue around that and what is actually possible within.
A right of first refusal on your invoices?
I'm sorry?
You put a right of first refusal on your invoices so that the collector has to come back to you if they want to sell it or anything like that?
No, I've never done anything like that. I also wasn't ever sure about the legal validity of any of that stuff. And but again, it's not something that thus far as a gallery that we've had to really contend with. Only a couple of our artists have work has ever shown up at auction, and I wouldn't say it kind of fits with. One of the benefits of specializing in artists that work with ephemeral materials and like to make art out of bacteria or non-conducive to archiving materials is that you don't run into this problem so often.
Yeah. Jeffrey, you've probably seen so much.
I mean, I've always worked on the basis of trust. So we try to work with artists, with collectors who we get to trust as people. And they trust me, trust them. It's gotten very extreme with this flipping situation in the past year. So a few people have broken my trust, and that's been very disappointing to me personally. It happened in the past only once or twice. Now it's quite prevalent. So yes, we have to play defense in what we sell, but that's another reason to develop relationships. So we're actually very careful in taking on new clients because we want to make sure it's a deep trusting relationship. Now, in terms of artists asking for resale rights royalty, none of the artists we work with have asked for that. And it's very cumbersome to actually enforce this. And so basically what I tell artists is make sure that you retain a number of your best works. So if you have a show with 8 works, keep 1 or 2 of them and build your collection so you have, if your art is increasing in value, you're going to benefit. And so I think that's the best way. And I've given that advice to many artists over the years and seen how they benefit.
Yeah, and just to also jump in here, I think the initiative usually comes from the gallery more from the artist. So some galleries have just like to put a right of first refusal where if someone's reselling, and usually there's like a time limit. So if you decide to sell the work within like 3 to 5 years, then you must bring it back to us first. But yeah, I think for the most part, how the industry has worked is sort of trusting in its self-regulating process. So as Jeffrey said, if someone breaches that trust that you build, then you will no longer work with them. And something that I stress in my classes is, yeah, it's, even though it's become a kind of like a global behemoth, the art world is still very small in many ways. And, you know, we all talk to each other. So if you are persona non grata at one gallery, you might soon find yourself persona non grata in other galleries.
Something that has amused me, I've never seen this before. So in 2 recent group shows, several of the artists, they send their work and the consignment contract, and then an amendment, here is my not for sale list. And so they have a list of 8 notorious collector flippers who we're not allowed to sell to. And of course, they're all people I know. For me, it's very amusing about how this happened. And it's not, these lists don't come from a high profile international artists. They come from young artists where the work sells for $25,000, but they've been victimized by some of these people. And so it's a very new development. All my years in the field, I never saw a list of do not sell to these people routinely coming with the consignment.
I do think, yeah, I think, and I'm curious about like what we'll see happen. Something that was released recently was a contract that I think one of the heads of Caddis Foundation sort of spearheaded with some artist feedback. So it's like an updated version of the Prjansky contract from the 70s. And I believe it also includes like a resale royalty provision. I don't know if people will be taking it up, but I do think there are more initiatives like that. I know that there's another artist collective, I believe based in New York, who drafted a bill for resale rights legislation in the US. You know, I mean, with the political climate right now, I'm not sure if that'll be on the first top of the agenda for lawmakers, but there do seem to be artists who are really like thinking about managing their careers in this way. And as Jeffrey says, so yeah, they might have these like riders of do not sell list. And yeah, I mean, what I always like to say is like, you know, I think artists ultimately are in the driver's seat, and they can navigate their careers in the way that they feel best supports their practices. And I think that kind of the really trust that you have with the people that you work with, like the gallery that you work with, but also like your patrons and collectors who support you and all of that, and just your artist community are all indispensably important. We have a question from Jonathan. What kinds of conversations are your artists having regarding their practices, regarding the market, regarding their relationships to the markets and institutions? Have the conversations been shifting? Do you sense some interests, curiosities, commitments on the horizon? Broad questions. I could speak to this a little bit, but would one of you like to start?
Sure.
I always avoid with the artist conversations about the market, the business. I prefer talking about art, and so I actually avoid this. We have simple conversations to explain some things that are going on, but I avoid the shop talk. That's not why I'm in the field.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, I think we definitely talk about their markets and the market. And I also agree that, I try to get artists to not get too consumed by thinking about the market, as I think it often distracts from the work, and you know, and I always just say to them that the most important thing is the quality of the work coming out of the studio, and everything else doesn't really matter. But I would say that conversations around institutions have changed a lot in the last few years, with the artists that I've had in their relationships to institutions. And I'm not going to say the importance of the institution, but there's a lot that I think people want to interrogate about institutions, especially in terms of participation in biennials or triennials, artist fees, you know, the exchange of cultural capital, all of these things. I mean, I would say that those conversations have been going since we have existed as a gallery, and, you know, like I think an organization like Wage, which was founded after Occupy Wall Street, you know, we're kind of brought that conversation into the forefront. So I think, you know, a lot of artists are re-examining the kind of blanket being in any biennial or any triennial or any, I think artists always want to be in the museum collection. And I think that history is a very important thing, and the stewardship of art is always very important. But I think it's always great to examine those conversations. Who are the audiences for those museums? What are those collections? What is that context? You know, are they living up to their missions? I think these are really important conversations for artists to think about.
Yeah, these are conversations we've definitely been having with our artists too. I do think, yeah, perhaps not so much about the market, but particularly in 2020, with the sort of the larger reckoning about racial and social inequities that we have, a lot of the attention in the art world has been on the museums and the institutions, how they're run, who are on their boards, and things like that. And I think more and more artists, you know, I think the power dynamic, particularly vis-a-vis institutions and that kind of validation that, you know, we all seek, perhaps, has felt like it's not something that you're allowed to question, but more and more people are feeling empowered and really drafting the redrafting the rules. And I think the museums know that. So in a way, I think it's in many ways it's been positive. I with the caveat that sometimes I feel like some of these conversations get like reactive and then get reposted and amplified in ways that, or just like go in directions that perhaps don't allow for more of a nuanced, complex take. But I do think a lot of artists are thinking about their relationship to museums, and even entering museum collections, I think. So something that we think about a lot, we have a lot of artists who use, like, you know, more of their bodies and a lot of questionable materials as far as their archivability goes. And, you know, there's endless amounts of paperwork that gets involved when works enter museum collections about how they should be preserved. But part of what we're thinking through and trying to have conversations about is about art as dialogue, as conversation, about saying something and meaning something at that time and allowing that to evolve and shift over time. So I think this kind of obsession about perfectly static objecthood of an artwork to be safeguarded in museum collections, oftentimes in storage for decades and centuries, could be rethought. You know, artworks can really like live and mean and look different perhaps later. So like we're just placing a work that's definitely not going to last, and it took some time, but we convinced the museum that that's sort of the, you know, meaning of the work. We have one more question. I have a question. What has their experience been in regards to art theft and its impact on business? I can't speak to that. Our artists are not really in demand for art thieves yet.
I would say, I guess there's two ways to read that question in terms of the theft of like copyright theft, in terms of like, you know, you hear a lot about fashion brands and things like that appropriating young artists without giving credit or royalties, or there's the direct actual theft of work, but neither of which I've experienced on any sort of level where I could speak to it.
Is probably more relevant for what I've done is theft of intellectual property.
Yeah.
Fashion brands, shockingly, because they could have easily just asked, just taking an artist's image with no consultation and no compensation. There's this artist fashion collaboration has gone on for quite some time now. You would think that some of the major brands would be more attuned to this, but it's still going on. And
for sure,
I had to engage in a lawsuit some years ago, which we won. It's very important for the art galleries to assert the intellectual property rights of the artists they represent. So that's a whole other dimension. It's not just selling the work, putting art in museums, it's protecting this. Now, in terms of kind of art theft capers that you see in movies, our experience with this is when we showed artists who are part of the graffiti street art world, because there's a whole tradition of racking that you're supposed to take things. You're not, you know. So when we did a Barry McGee show, you know, it was always a nightmare that there would be 5-6 works that would be ripped off, and no matter how hard we tried with people dispatched to watch all the rooms, you know, the guys who do the racking, they're so skilled, they can get away with anything. But it was very serious for us, because like I would sell a Barry McGee multi-panel work with 150 panels, and someone would come in and steal the 3 most exquisite hand drawings, and the person who we sold it to said, "I'm sorry, canceled sale, and I'm not going to take it now." And I said, "Well, we'll get, you know, Barry will redo the drawings, no problem." No, it's a damaged work. So that was our problem. It was with this whole graffiti community, but we wanted to be part of it, and that came with the territory.
And with actually, yeah, I didn't think of that from the question, but with IP, I also think it's interesting to consider from the flip side, in that particularly with, you know, as digital technology has made it so easy to reference, you know, and copy and paste elements, more and more artists have been incorporating, you know, either it might be our historical references, but also touching upon real life like news events. And technically speaking, some of their work could be considered IP violations as well. So I do think IP is going to increasingly, and right of publicity. So like the use of someone's likeness or name in artworks will continue to grow to be these sorts of like sources of tension in the next few years. I think, I mean, I could stay on and just listen to more stories from Jeffrey about the art world, but in the interest of time, I think this is a good place to wrap up the conversation. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you to the speakers, Oliver and Jeffrey. Hope that we'll be back to, you know, healthy times where we are able to see each other in person again, but stay safe and well in the meantime.
Thank you, Kibam.
Thank you, everybody. Thank
you so much.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you, Oliver. Thank you, Kibam. Thanks for everybody who joined us on the Zoom, and we'll be back in 2 weeks' time with another conversation. Romeo Guzman, who's a professor of history from Claremont Graduate University, and his partner, Caribbean Fragosa, who started something called the South El Monte Arts Posse, and have just published a volume called East of East, all about the art, history, and community of East Los Angeles. as well as a magazine that they now edit online called Boom California. So join us next week. Jeffrey, Oliver, Kibum, thank you again. It was fantastic. And we look forward to seeing you soon.